Hello, everybody. Welcome to What Would Your Ideal World Be? A new podcast which examines many important people and the important things in their lives, what they think about most current trends at the moment, what they think about certain subject matters, and of course, what their ideal world would be. A.F. Branco is a conservative political cartoonist. He's been pursuing that role for the last few decades and currently runs the Comically Incorrect site where he regularly uploads his work. Hello.
How you doing?
Fine, thank you. Yourself?
I'm doing great.
Okay, thank you for coming on tonight. And the first question I wanted to ask you is, what was your, if you don't mind me using colloquialism, what was your red pill moment? What got you into politics in general? What was the starting point for you?
Thanks for having me on. It was more of a gradual thing for me. I think I thought of myself as more of a liberal, maybe in high school and uh, as I was getting older in my 20s. But I think it was more of a gradual thing, seeing what was going on and comparing that to other things. Comparing the two parties and their solutions just seemed to be more conservative ideas and plans seem to be working better.
Hmm. And was there any particular candidate or a person in the Republican ticket that, or the Republican side that swayed you in particular? Was it just like a sort of gradual thing anyway, or did it just happen to be specific candidates that maybe?
I think Ronald Reagan really grabbed me. That is when I really started getting into politics. Some of the things that he was saying, some of the things in historic perspective as far as the Democrats go. Right, some of the things that he was saying in historical perspective as far as the United States and where it had been, where it's coming, our founding fathers. I could see from my own experiences that we were drifting severely to the left, dangerously so. It was impeding on our civil liberties and our rights. And I became interested in politics because of that.
Hmm. Has there been anyone on the Democratic side since then that you've liked, or is it just been mainly they're all complete, the things are busted flush, and the only thing worth doing is essentially the Republicans? Or has there been any sort of Democratic candidate that you've actually liked since then, or has it just been a matter of pretty much just busted flush?
There's been some that I've liked more than others. A lot of your blue dog Republicans, which I don't believe, and other than Manchin, there isn't too much of it anymore. They've gone severely to the left. I mean, radical left. That's pulling them over the edge, I think. So no, not really. They're long gone, if there was any.
And what got you into cartooning, and essentially who were your early influences in terms of political cartooning?
I've been drawing since I was a little kid in school. Probably, like I've said many times, when I should have been doing other things like reading, writing, and arithmetic. I enjoyed drawing, and it, I guess it kind of built my ability to illustrate what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling, enough so that a lot of people are seeing it and understanding them and identifying with them.
Hmm. And how do you feel about the sort of success you've had on social media and stuff like that, where alongside some other political cartoonists, you're probably one of the more famous sort of political cartoonists, at least as far as social media goes, for example? How do you feel about the fact that there's a lot of people who follow you and so on? How does that make you feel, really?
Makes me feel like one of the crowd or one of the guys. I mean, everybody has their part to play. I'm playing my part. I uh, went into cartooning in 2010, right after Obama. I saw what Obama was doing. He was very Marxist in some of his ideas with Obamacare and how he was constructing that and how he's implementing it. I became fed up with a lot of his policies. That is what brought me into cartooning again. I'd always did some painting, drawing, and that, but I tried to utilize what I could do as far as my talents go, to put forth a message. And I listened to a few talk show hosts and a few people that would always say, everybody can play a part. What can you do to advance the message? And that's what I can do to advance the message.
Hmm. And how does it feel like during sort of like the Trump era that you were, I hope you don't mind me saying, sort of like a minority of sort of like pro-Trump political cartoonists? Oh, how did that make you feel? And why do you think there are not so many sort of like pro-Trump cartoonists, let alone sort of like general pro-right-wing cartoonists in the United States, at least from what I could see?
I don't know. It seems like a lot of the arts seem to go left. I don't know if it's peer pressure, what it is. But again, let me go back to the other question. How do I feel about being a popular cartoonist? Well, I just feel like I'm one of the guys putting forth a message. I don't look at my followers as fans. I look at them as compadres. Uh, uh, a team, and I'm there to enforce, I'm not enforce, but there to reinforce their thoughts, make them feel like they're not alone in the arena of ideas. Um, as far as I just put out what I feel. I'm not going to lean one way or the other because of how society or a particular group of people want me to go. I'm going to do what my heart tells me to do, what my mind tells me to do.
Hmm. And how do you feel like maybe this is pretty much an yeah, like how do you feel like Biden is doing currently at the moment and so on? Like what do you think, how do you think things are going around American politics now currently?
I think they're horrible. I think it's almost like the Democrats are purposely trying to destroy what America is all about. Whether it's the voting, what they call it, the For the People's Act, it's more
Yeah.
for the Dead People Voting Act, or
Zimbabwe.
it's it's Screw the People Act, because what it does is you're taking it away from the states and doing away with that and make it more federalized, doing away with voter ID. I mean, it's more restrictive. They say it's trying to get more people to vote. Well, no, they're more interested in letting more people vote fraudulently. It puts no controls on the mail-in voting. It takes everything away to where checks and balances. It's a fraud, this Voting Rights Act, or whatever they're calling it, For the People's Act.
Hmm. And
So,
what do you why do you think the Democrats have gone so, well, you know, a lot more left than they were saying like previous generations, and others like say blue dog Democrats that you described earlier are becoming a more minority, whereas like a few generations ago they probably would have had a little bit more representation.
well, the Democrats and the Republicans used to be two sides of the same coin. They both believed in religious freedom. They both believed in capitalism. Just one side may have been a little bit left or a little bit liberal on some ideas, and then sometimes they would come together on other ideas. But even John F. Kennedy, way back when, a lot of the Democrats back then were adamantly against communism and socialism. Now, because I believe of Marxism, Marxist teachers, Marxist professors throughout our higher education and some of our lower education have just completely destroyed the youth thinking. We need to get more back in. We need to get back to teaching the horrible effects of communism and its history. And that's not being taught. And I believe that's probably a large part of the problem.
Hmm. And what do you think it is that, despite a lot of polling showing that much of the programs that they pursue aren't particularly popular per se, with a lot of the Democratic programs, why do you think in certain states, like say California, or if I'm not mistaken, your home state of Washington is a Democrat state, why do you think they still continue to win so many votes? Is it because of like sort of like tribal loyalty, or what do you think it might be the cause there?
Well, they're trying to implement in the United States, the entire United States, what they did in California. California used to be more of a conservative state. but they pushed open borders and they pushed Marxism. And finally, now you have Republicans have become a minority, mainly due to because they just keep funding poverty. You fund poverty, you get more of it. Opening up the borders, allowing more illegals in, and it just saturates things, and that's what they're trying to do with the United States is open up the borders, get more illegal voting, I believe. I don't know if it's working in their favor right now, but it seems that is what their plan is.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that's why they won't, for example, like whenever Kamala Harris is asked as someone that she won't visit the border because then there might be some of the implications might be seen before her eyes, and that might either change her mind or make it impossible for her to deny what's going on in terms of like what's actually happens at the border and stuff like that. Do you think that's why they sort of negate responsibility in that sense?
Well, as far as Kamala Harris and Biden go, they know very well politically that wherever they go, cameras follow. And they don't want cameras down at the border as much as they can help it. Although I did hear an update. Kamala said that she's going to, within a few days or a week, visit the border. If they go down to the border and they bring any attention to it, they're going to see the crisis and the human crisis that's going on down there, and they don't want any part of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a disaster,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a disaster that Trump solved somewhat. He had shut down the flow of traffic coming across. He worked out a deal with Mexico to have the people who wanted to get certain status to have to achieve that in Mexico and put in for it in Mexico. And it just stopped a lot of it. I think there's been almost 100 and some thousand people in the last 3 or 4 months that have crossed that border. During Trump, the last 3 months of Trump's presidency, only 47 people crossed the border. So were arrested or whatever the stats are, but there's a drastic divide in how Trump handled it and how Biden's handling it, and they don't want to bring attention to it.
Mm-hmm. And what happened to Joe Biden, though, I wonder, because he used to be sort of like a more moderate Democrat in years past. He passed off like the 1994 crime bill and so on in his yesteryears. What's happened to him? Do you think he's actually like he agrees with a lot of this stuff, or do you think he's just one of these sort of like power hungry politicians who will just sort of like run with a winning team in order to win power, or whatever?
I don't think he has any facilities, mental facilities, to be able to decide what he is. I think he's so vulnerable mentally, he's just going along with the pack. I don't think he has any really sincere ideas one way or the other. He's always been a politician. He's always been one of these that sticks his finger up into the wind to see which way it's going, and he goes that way. I mean, he was good friends with a lot of the Southern Democrats that were ex-KK members, and I believe if he had any principles at all back then, he sure doesn't now. And I don't think he knows where he's at most of the time. I think he's just trusting whoever's guiding him and writing his words up on a teleprompter.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's sort of like in Lord of the Rings situation whereby Wormtongue easily influences that king with all the words and stuff like that because the guy's a little bit out of it?
That's a good analogy.
Mm-hmm.
Good analogy.
Mm-hmm. And who do you think could like beat Biden in 2024 hypothetically? Like, who would you say was ideal? Because people were suggesting Trump should run again, or Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida. Who would you think would be the best person to beat Biden in 2024?
I don't know. I think it's a little bit too early to tell, to see where everything levels off. The focus, I think, with everybody, and Trump included, and is the 22 election.
Mm-hmm.
They're really going after that, and the way the Democrats are going, and you can see that they're running a little scared right now because their policies never work. So now that everybody can see, and this is the pendulum swing that happens, everyone. So it takes people to vote for Democrats to say, oh, wait a minute, these policies are crazy, they're insane. And a lot of people are going to find out, are finding out right now just how insane they are as far as the border goes, as far as the taxes go, as far as all the what Biden is implementing, and what his, I don't say Biden's implementing, I say that because it's his administration, but it's actually the radical left are trying to implement as far as gun control, taxes, critical race theory. All these things are scaring people. So if they're going to have, they're going to do very well in 2022. Now, past that, I don't know. I have to see how things level off and see where everything lands. Right now, Trump is leading the party. He deserves to lead the party, and right now, I think it's Trump. If you were to put the hammer down on him.
Hmm. And when do you think, like, overall, the sort of like bubble will burst of the Democratic Party in the long run? Because you see, like, sort of moderate ones leave, like the one in New Jersey, I think it was, who defected to the Republicans. I think there was someone in Nevada who did as well, or Las Vegas. When do you think? Because especially because, like, in say Texas, for example, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of Hispanic voters who were usually sort of Democrats turned to Trump because they didn't particularly like sort of what the Democratic campaign. When do you think the bubble will finally burst? Will it be a particular issue or whatever? Because there are a lot of people who are saying they can't really continue this program forever, especially if it doesn't necessarily work.
Um, what bubble is that you're talking
Essentially,
about?
like their electoral bubble, like, will there be a point essentially where they go so far to the extremes for policies that people don't like that eventually they'll no longer hold a majority party status, sort of like what's happened in my country with the Labour Party, so to speak, where it seems hard that they can win an election again. So, like, do you think that will happen with the Democrats at some point in the future? Because given all the controversies that are going on.
What, well, I think, I think that the Republicans and the GOP have a very good chance in 2022. But what the Democrats are trying to do is they're trying to implement policies and rules and regulations in our voting and so forth, to where it just eliminates any possibility of the opposing party to ever get elected again. That is what the voting that is what this new voting law that they were trying to pass, it didn't go through yet, hasn't gone through yet, but they're trying to do it so that the Republicans, they can take control federally of all the local elections, make it so that you can't have voter ID, make it easier to cheat, make it easier to throw ballots around and have them filled out without verifying them. So their plan is to make it to where Republicans can never be reelected. Hopefully, because of Manchin and a few others in the Senate, we can stop this. And then if Republicans gain power, I hope they can do some things that remedy that, to where Democrats aren't allowed to cheat, and reinforce our voting regulations so that people have, it's a more fair, to keep Democrats from sabotaging our democracy.
Mm-hmm. Um, in terms of political cartooning, by the way, when you see, what inspires you? Like, what is there any particular issues that inspire you to cartoon more than others? And how long does it usually take you to craft a new cartoon?
Well, it depends on how much information is in the cartoon. A lot of times I'll do a series of drafts before I actually rest on a final look. And then, of course, then I have to finish drawing it, coloring and all that. The actual drawing the cartoon, once I've finalized what I'm going to do, probably maybe anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, sometimes longer if I have to make some changes. But what some of my pet peeves are media bias. That's probably a big one of mine. The other one is Marxism. I think Marxism is prevailing, is just going bananas. It's wokeness is another one. Wokeness is permeating our corporate heads, boardrooms. It's basically a cancer on what the United States used to be as far as freedom goes, free speech, any number of things within our Bill of Rights that I see devastating.
Hmm. And is there any who's your like sort of like favorite politicians to sort of draw like caricature? And is there any ones that you've done that are particularly harder than others, for example, in terms of like drawing them and conceptual, like how you're gonna, visualize it?
Um, I don't know. I don't know which one would be the hardest. I used to enjoy drawing Obama with the big ears. I used to, and then sometimes it takes me a little while to um, really get the personality in what I want to draw, like Biden. The first couple of Bidens I might do might not be what I end up using a lot of. Hillary was fun to draw. Um, just any number of them. I look at them all as a challenge.
Hmm. You talked about media bias just now, and what do you think? How did it become so bad in the United States, where you have all these networks who are essentially just parroting off the same sort of hymn sheet, for example? Because wasn't there a point where they weren't all essentially so based in ideology that affected their coverage to a point where it could be inaccurate?
Well, I did a cartoon, I don't know, about a year or two ago. Can't remember, where the DNC or the Democrat Party was shoving a fax into a notable thing into a fax machine, and it had a lot of lines going out to ABC, NBC, CBS, NPR, and they were all getting the same fax. And I believe that's what's happening. I believe that our media and our politics, and especially the Democrat Party, are so incestuous that it's corrupt. And so when you listen to the phrasing on ABC or CBS or CNN or MSNBC, they'll use the same phrasing, so they're all coordinating this information. And that's where the danger lies with the media. It's more like Pravda. You have to learn to read the news today in a way that the Russians or the Soviet Union people used to read Pravda. Whatever Pravda said, they had to read in between the lines and almost read it opposite of the other in order to try and figure out what they're saying. And thankfully, we still have some conservative news like Newsmax, A1, some Fox reporting that gives us something to compare it to. I will listen to MSNBC for a while, but I always have to go back and read what the news is they're not telling us, and then compare the two.
Mhm. Was there a specific period where it became like really bad though? Because I remember like listening to Megan Kelly formerly of Fox News, who talked about like, there was a time which you could pick up like the New York Times, and even though it would be biased to the left, it will still be factual to an extent. Why is it just dropped off so badly? Like, when did it drop off so badly? Was there like a specific period where, I don't know, a certain candidate came in and there was like peer pressure, or what happened? Do you
I
think?
think, yeah, good question. I believe that the media has always been left, and they have been sliding more to the left every election, it seems like. But I saw a drastic jump to the left when Donald Trump came into play. And it felt like it gave them an excuse to be totally biased, because they assumed everybody hated Trump. I believe that there were people within the deep state, within the bureaucracy, that were pushing the media, the left-wing media, to put negative stories out about Trump, all as an effect to get rid of him, because he was going in to clean up the swamp, to drain the swamp, as he would say. And it scared them to death. And the media is all a part of this deep state. They're all a part of the swamp. And they felt like they had an excuse. And then their hair caught on fire. They just went ballistic with it. And to the point where most all the news about Trump over the last 4 years has been a lie, whether it's Russian collusion, whether it's Ukrainian thing, whether it's about him and the vaccines, hydroxychloroquine, you just name it, lie after lie after lie. And I'm afraid that a lot of the people on the left who watch that news are none the wiser.
Hmm. And one other thing about that is like, why do you think like they're not even bothering to improve? Because like a lot of the polling shows in the States, if I'm not mistaken, that there's very little trust in the media. Or you look, for example, like their ratings aren't doing very well post-Trump, or the fact, for example, like Brian Stelter, the CNN reporter, went on C-SPAN a couple of days ago, and there were a lot of callers being, criticizing him and so on. Why do you not think that they're bothering to do any better? Just because like they've just been like they're so fixated on what they believe in their ideologies that they're not even bothering to actually be proper journalists in a way.
My best hunch on that one is they're not interested in the news anymore. None of them are interested in the news anymore. They're interested in twisting and propagating the American voter. And that's what they're there. They wake up every morning looking at a way to see if they can fool American people into thinking that such and such is a good or bad based on their agenda and their leftist radical agenda. And a lot of these people are products of Marxist colleges. Some of our some of our CEOs and that from the corporations are indoctrinated with Marxist viewpoints. So that's about all I have to say about that. I mean, it's it's a tragedy because people aren't getting the information they need to make informed decisions.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that from that? By the way, during your cartooning career, had there been any sort of outlets that like, have contacted you to like use your stuff, for example, or anything like that, or has it just been mainly you being independent? If you don't mind me asking.
Well, I'm syndicated through Creators Syndicate. I draw cartoons for Legal Insurrection, for Americans for Limited Government, Daily Torch, also for Conservative Daily News, America Cares, and Flag and Cross. All of those organizations I draw for. Now they don't tell me what to draw. I just draw and they post them. They put their logo up there and they post them, and then basically they're sponsoring my cartooning and giving me some compensation for that.
Mm-hmm.
So does that answer your question? I'm not sure if I got
yeah, it's fine. Yeah. One of the other things I wanted to ask is about like we talked quite a lot about the Democrats, but on the Republican side, like how do you feel like the Republican Party sort of post-Trump is currently doing? Because a lot of complaints, especially against people like, for example, Mitch McConnell and the way he's sort of handling things in the Senate and so on. Do you think that they are? Do you think they appreciate sort of like the impact that Trump had, and that if they possibly continue his sort of policies of sort of like economic nationalism, sort of fighting the culture wars and stuff like that, they could do very well in sort of like both middle America and a lot of the southern states, for example? Or do you think they just want to wash their hands with him, some of these people, for whatever reason?
Well, I think there are a good number of them in the Congress and in the Senate that want to wash their hands of him. They don't like the controversy. They'd rather have milk toast. They'd rather have the guy that gets along to go along and try to implement a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Trump was somebody that took what Republicans say they want and ran with it. The difference between a Republican politician, not all of them, but some of them, and what the difference is what they want and what the people want. The Republicans always seem, and some Democrats run on what they think the people want. But once they get in there, they go the other way, or they play this little back and forth game. Trump wasn't playing. He went in there, he says, okay, you want this, you want border security, you want low taxes, you want the capital of Israel to go to Jerusalem. He went down the list. In fact, it got to the point where he was fulfilling promises at a rapid rate to where he was running out of promises, looking for more promises to keep. I've never seen a politician do that before. That's unusual. So what they did when the election came around, the media just beat on him so bad that a lot of these mindless sheep out here decided to go with a guy, an old man with dementia over somebody who always put America first every time, with every implementation, every law, everything that he tried to put forth was about America being first. And they took that guy out and put this guy with dementia who's got is being pushed by a radical agenda that's literally destroying America right in front of our very eyes.
And one other thing I wanted to ask is like, why do you think that they would try and wash their hands of him, given that sort of like the other sort of centrist Republicans of the past, people like say Mitt Romney or people like say John McCain, didn't manage to win elections based on those sort of principles, but someone like Trump came in and did manage to win at least the first time, the first presidential election he ran in, and managed to break through sort of the blue wall that says like Michigan and Wisconsin and so on, that hadn't been won by a Republican for a generation. Like, why would they not seize the opportunity as opposed to sort of like run away from it? It just seems like a bit, I don't know, electorally suicidal. I don't know. Maybe that's just my opinion.
I just think that people like Romney are cowards. They're politicians. A politician is a politician. It's to stick your finger up into the wind, see which way it's blowing, see how I can finagle this. I believe that at heart, Romney is a Democrat, but he's been a Republican for so long, and I don't believe he's a true Republican. He might be an old dog a blue dog Democrat, maybe to some degree, but I just don't think a lot of them have the cojones to really implement what they say they want.
Mhm. And do you think like this is the only way to sort of like solve sort of like the problem of getting some of these, as Michael Knowles will call them, squish Republicans out, would be to sort of like campaign a lot more in primary rounds, for example, like get more candidates in who are a little bit more supportive of certain agendas, as opposed to just like keep putting in like say, the next Cheney or Bush, for example.
And I think that is exactly what Trump and his people are doing right now. They're finding candidates that support America first. And that is a good sign. And I think that is what they're shooting for 2022, looking for candidates in primaries that are going to put America first. And they're going into some of their backgrounds to find out how they voted in the past. And I think that's a good way to see if they're how wishy-washy they actually are.
Mhm.
So I think that's a good thing, actually. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. One other thing I want to ask you, I hope you don't mind, this might be a little bit more personal. Like, you live in Washington, if I'm not mistaken. How does it feel to be sort of, if you don't mind me asking, like a Republican, more conservative-minded voter in what's largely a Democratic state? How does it feel? Is it, and how do you feel about the fact that they have sort of like run your state, the Democrats, for quite a few decades now?
Well, again, we get back to the type of voting we have. Since we've had mail-in voting, again, I feel lends itself to a lot of corruption and a lot of misplaced ballots and a lot of empty ballots that are easily filled out by somebody and sent in and not verified. Um, we have been going left. We would go from for a while there, we'd have a Republican governor, we'd have a more of a liberal governor. But I remember a few elections back, Dino Rossi was a Republican and he won at first. Then they did a recount. Well, he won the recount. And then they did another recount and he lost that one. I believe that's how it went. But it was just miraculous how they kept finding these stacks of votes in trunks of cars and under desks somewhere. That to me is fraud. I don't care how you look at it. I think that's a big problem. And I don't know if we're ever going to change it. We have a governor that's just horrible. He's not very bright. He's not very smart. He's not a leader. He's one of these guys that looks around and sees what the other Democrat governors are doing, and he says, "Yeah, I'll do that," and isn't really implementing leadership in some of these things.
Hmm. And what do you think would be the way to fix voter fraud that goes on in the United States? Especially because I've heard there's been other controversies in cases, especially if I'm not mistaken, in California, where they had other issues with certain candidates as well. What do you think the best way to fix it would be? Would be to do what say states like Georgia and Pennsylvania are currently doing, which is pushing through stuff like voter ID and stricter stuff on this mail-in voting, for example. Do you think that's sort of like the way to do it, or is there another solution that you think might be practical?
Well, I think there's a lot of practical solutions to this. Number one is make sure that everybody who votes is who they say they are. That's it. Voter ID is very important. They could actually expand, like Georgia, they expanded the availability to vote. They expanded it, but they wanted voter ID. And I think if they put forth those implemented that, they keep saying that Republicans are trying to suppress vote. No, we're trying to suppress illegal votes. We want all legal voting. We want people, all we ask for is that whoever votes is who they say they are, and actually a person voting, not Mickey Mouse, not a dead person. And we want to be able to verify those votes. There's nothing wrong with that. And anybody thinks that there's something wrong with that is actually looking at using fraud to win elections.
Mm-hmm. And do you think anyone maybe distract from that, that possibility that they use fraud to win these elections, to distract their base from thinking about that too hard? Like they want to whip up their activist bases to a frenzy by say, "Oh, look, it's voter suppression," or "Look, it's Jim Crow 2.0." I know some people say that or whatever. What do you think, like, say, this activist class that they sort of have as their solid base now, more than anything else, keeps falling for such stuff? Is it because a lot of them are just genuine fanatics, do you think?
Well, I think something's changing somewhere because just recent polling indicates that uh, said that 80% of the population is for voter ID. So right there, I think Democrats are starting to look at that going, uh-oh, we may be maybe losing this one. Like I said, they could expand the voting as far as a day, or not a day, but expand it from, like, say, ending at 7 o'clock, going in later, having more polling booths and so forth, to where everybody gets a chance to vote. But let's make sure that everybody that's voting is legal. I think a lot of the Democrats use hype. They use things like defund police. They use things like for instance, police brutality against Black people, cops killing Black people. They act like that's on the rise. They act like that's a systemic racist problem. It's not. The numbers and the statistics do not play that out at all. And but they keep pushing it because the Democrats feel that they win by dividing the population, by keep stoking the racist fires. It keeps people voting for him. I think it's disingenuous. I think it's dangerous. We can see by all the riots that have happened over the last year with Antifa and BLM and burning down cities and businesses and killing cops and all that. You can see this has not helped anybody. Democrats are not helping. In fact, I would even advocate that the Democrat Party should be labeled as a terrorist organization, because they've caused this mess.
Mm-hmm. And one other thing I wanted to ask about the whole voter fraud thing is, like, how do you feel that certain companies like Coca-Cola, for example, and Delta Airlines openly like try to influence the voting decision about those voter ID laws in Georgia? Like, how do you feel that companies are now actually doing this? Is it because, do you think they're scared of sort of like maybe the mob coming after them, or do you think they're willingly doing this for whatever cynical reason?
They're afraid. And some of them, like the CEO from Coca-Cola is from Australia or is New Zealand, somewhere place like that. He's not even an American. So he's probably gone to, probably surrounded by woke people, probably went to a university somewhere where Marxists were teaching business. I went to, just to give you an idea, in college, I was taught business. I took a business class and it was taught by a Marxist, a self-admitted Marxist. He was teaching a business class, and I just, that just
Oxymoronic.
puzzled me. And his slant on business and his slant on the entire world was corruptive. It had nothing to do with business, more of an anti-business class, more of an anti-free market class than it was actually a business class.
And why do you think that, when do you think that sort of this takeover of the American education system, especially in universities, by self-professed Marxists took place? Especially because you look at, say, more recently, like at Berkeley a couple of years ago, for example, we had Antifa there, or professors openly telling students that she needed some muscle in order to remove people. Like, when do you think the sort of takeover of the university system by a lot of these very left-wing people took place?
It's been allowed to happen. It's funny that the colleges like Berkeley were the foundations of free expression. I mean, I don't know if that's the term foundation, but they exemplary they really exuded free speech, really promoted free speech. Now they promote anti-free speech. I don't understand how you can go from free speech to anti-free speech, or just speech that you agree with, and anything else is considered wrong or illegal or should be illegal. Um, I think it's, again, we get back to the Marxists have slowly put themselves in positions of power or positions of influence, whether it be the media, whether it be higher education, early education. They have put themselves in those positions for specific reasons and ways to drive their agenda eventually, and they're looking at the long game. I'm now hearing a lot of politicians trying to push conservatives to get involved in their local government, because that's where it starts, in their school boards, local city government. It just seems to be where liberals have gravitated to in those positions, because conservatives, on the most part, are running businesses, raising kids, going to church, doing all the things. They've kind of let that go and just let it happen. They need to be more involved in those positions, and then it starts from there and works its way up. And those people find their way to positions in government, and that's how we're going to change things. Just screaming at the TV, or I see a lot of talking heads that somebody needs to do something about this. Somebody needs to do something about what's going on over here. But that's all they're saying, is somebody needs to do something. And actually, the do something is getting involved.
Mhm. And why do you think like the left have essentially, the sort of cultural revolutionary left, have gone from being pro free speech in the 1960s, if you sort of like look at a lot of the placards where they're saying more free speech or something like that, to now where they're essentially completely on the opposite side? Is it because like they've gone from supporting it, but now they've gotten a lot older and they've got a lot more decadent and lazy in power that they're allowing this to happen? Or do you think it's just they hid behind that slogan to make themselves look good until it was too late for anyone to stop them?
I think they're a product. I think today they're a product of Marxism. Back in the older days, in the 60s and that, it was truth to power, all this, but the kids today are a product of the people of the 60s, and it's just mutated into this anything that goes against what they think is real or right is dangerous. It's the equivalent of silencing Hitler to them. And they have been brainwashed into believing that anybody that's on the conservative side is Hitler or Marx or is not, or Nazis. And they don't realize, and they're not taught the real history. And the real history here is that fascism and Marxism and socialism all root from the same tree. They're all intertwined in the tree. And they try to put conservative, American conservatism into that same tree, and it doesn't. It's a separate tree. Liberty and conservatism in America is a separate tree. It's a tree of liberty. But if you want to look at socialism and Marxism and fascism and all those, they're all in that same Marxist socialism tree.
And how do you think, like, people talk about the long march through the institutions, about how the left took a lot of this soft cultural power? Is there a way for like the right to sort of like do a counter march and get a lot of them back, so to speak. Like you were talking about people going at the local school boards to sort of like influence that, for example. Do you think it's just a matter of just more conservative-minded people getting involved in, like, say, local activism or their local, institutions or their local, political party group or whatever it is? Do you think it's just a matter of just community organizing, maybe, and that it starts from there and it gets to the top, perhaps?
I'm inspired by what I'm seeing right now with critical race theory. A lot of the parents, a lot of people are rising up against it because they know it roots from Marxism. They're seeing it firsthand. And I think a lot of people's eyes were opened during the Zoom classes their kids were seeing. They could actually see what their teachers were talking about, what they were saying. There is no reason to talk about how great Marxism is in a math class. There's no reason to teach kids it's okay to go out into the street and protest against police in an English class. And they were seeing some of this stuff. And I think it's enraged a lot of these parents, and they're starting to get afraid. They're starting to believe some of what they thought were conspiracy theories among the conservatives, calling the communists are taking over. Well, they are in a lot of ways. And I think I'm very inspired what I'm seeing in at these school board meetings and these parents rising up. I just hope it continues, and I hope it continues on into the election for 2022.
Hmm. And do you think that one of the reasons they use stuff like, say, critical race theory and so on, just to cynically maintain power? Because you look at, say, I remember seeing on Tucker Carlson this, I can't remember her name, some leader of a teachers union in Los Angeles who was claiming that people who were criticizing her or her union were privileged or something, and they wanted to find out more about the race of the people complaining, so they could essentially silence them if they were, for example, like claim they would have white privilege even though they had nothing to do with the subject matter. Do you think it's just like they were using cynical sort of like dog whistles like that in order to remain in charge?
Exactly. That's what the entire thing about racism is. If we're losing the argument, we're going to call you a racist. Exactly what they do. That's all part of the whole game that they play.
Mhm. And when do you think sort of like this cultural revolution, so to speak, will implode like a lot of this sort of stuff that they do? Because if you look at, say, previous ones, like if, for example, in revolutionary France, Maximilien Robespierre was beheaded by his own guillotine, for instance, or in China, when their cultural revolution ended after Mao that they arrested the Gang of Four and so on. And America's initial sort of like Orange of the Hippie movement, if I'm not mistaken, sort of died out in the late '60s with the rise of Nixon and the Ultimate Freeway Festival and the Manson family and stuff like that. So do you think it's just only a matter of time before something goes so outlandish that it's just going to implode in on itself?
Well, I think that's happening in a lot of ways. I think you see Bill Maher, he's standing up against this wokeness. You see some comedians who tend to be on the left standing up against it. And that's what we need. We can disagree about a lot of things, but we should probably all agree that a cultural revolution is like the Chinese Cultural Revolution. And a lot of people who survived the Chinese Cultural Revolution who are living here today say that the similarities are just unbelievable. What they're doing is, and I believe that a lot of the radicals on the Democrat are behind it. For instance, white privilege. I love it when these liberal, college educated, rich, white liberals say white privilege. I want you to give up your white privilege first. If it's such a great idea, give your job to somebody of color. Give all your money to somebody of color, and then I might sit back and say, he believes in what he practices what he preaches. But they're hypocrites. They're never going to do that. What they want is they want the government to come in and take whatever you have and give it to a person of color or make things unfair. But they don't want you to take theirs. They don't take mine. So basically, we need to fight this Chinese Cultural Revolution. And ironically enough, I believe the Chinese are behind this. They're infiltrated in all of our higher education. If you just do a little Google research, they're inundated with Chinese money. I believe the Chinese Communist government own a lot of our politicians in DC, on both sides of the aisle. That's why it's hard to get them to criticize the Chinese government. And that's just, this is dangerous. And I don't know what to do about it other than have people speak out about it.
Mhm. And how do you feel like, if I'm not mistaken, the Daily Mail has reported recently, like, how do you feel about the fact that a North Korean student who's at Columbia University, if I'm not mistaken, has said that, it's so crazy. I can't remember what she said specifically, but it was along the lines of something like, all this sort of cultural stuff that's going on was so crazy that she had to sort of censor her own opinions again. It made her sort of feel like she was back in North Korea again. How do you feel that some universities in America are so, you know, conformists that people who've lived in despotism before say it reminds of despotism? Do you think that's how bad a sign do you think that is of a lot of these universities? How much of a sort of splot on their records, I guess?
Well, and it's true. I think a lot of people who come from some of these communist countries can see what's going on, and they're, I think a lot of them are surprised by it. Just people who have not experienced communism, dictatorships, and places like the Soviet Union, Cuba, they don't understand what they're asking for. And I think it's just, they need to be taught what this is all about. They need to be taught the real history of communism, where it comes from, what the disaster it has been for humanity, the millions of lives it's cost. They're not taught this because a lot of the professors and teachers are communist sympathizers. So they're not going to be taught. And that's why you see a lot of them out on the streets rioting and protesting, because they don't understand what they're protesting and what the alternative is.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think that so many on the American left, I'm not talking about all of them, but a lot of them, openly express like sympathy for, say, or like Russia's defense of state countries like Cuba or China, for example, and seem to think that's okay? Whereas if no one on the right would dare advocate or sympathize with, say, like Nazi Germany or maybe sort of like Pinochet's Chile, for example, or stuff like that. Why do you think they're so gun ho about backing like these states? And why do you think that's seen as more acceptable than saying, as opposed to it being, just essentially rejected in the same way that anyone who says that, well, Hitler's Germany wasn't that bad, or some of these other fascist states were bad? But why do you think that people are a lot more accepting, especially in the media, of people who defend, say, Cuba or China, as opposed to, say, people who dare defend Nazi Germany or some of these other fascist despotisms, which they wouldn't do if they don't want to look stupid?
Yeah, I'll go back to the fact that Chinese money has infiltrated a lot of our government. There's even fear that they've infiltrated the FBI, the CIA. I mean, I have no proof of that, but it's been hearsay. They've infiltrated a lot of aspects of our government. Chinese money has influenced a lot of our politicians, whether it be some on the conservative side or the Republican side too, and many on the Democrat side, and many in the media itself. Sports is being infiltrated by the Chinese government. They're afraid to speak out. You have LeBron James, who won't criticize China for some of the atrocities that they're conducting right now: slave labor, the Uyghurs, concentration camps, all of this stuff. And I think it all comes from the same thing. We're going back to their education, Marxist teachings and Marxist influences in their colleges and their education, all kind of plays out in this.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think, like, say, do you think that after, if it's proven that sort of like China knowingly, with all the experiments that they were doing in that Wuhan lab, talking, coronavirus, did the coronavirus came out of a lab and was manufactured by accident or whatever, if that turns out to be true and stuff like that, do you think that will finally, wake up a lot of the world to sort of the threat China poses? Because people do say, for example, like the Soviet Union was ended mainly because of Chernobyl. And people have said like this makes Chernobyl, the whole coronavirus thing, look like a walk in the park. Do you think if it is proven that the whole lab theory about coronavirus is true, that people finally wake up to how serious a threat the Chinese Communist Party is, or do you think it'll just be same as normal with a few like more tougher words there to look like they're actually doing something?
Well, I think the biggest threat is our media in regards to this. They're not being honest with the people. In fact, all we heard for the last few months was that any talk of it being a virus that escaped the Wuhan laboratory was squelched, was shut down. FBI or the Facebook would delete your comments or just ban you. Twitter was banning you if you just mentioned anything about the Wuhan virus or anything like that. Now it's coming out that it's a big possibility and probably likely that it did. But that's the danger we have with media. The media is deciding when and where we can have truth or when and where we can have free speech. And that's really dangerous in a democracy. The Democrats claim that they want democracy, but they really don't. They want to control. They want to control them being in power and perpetuity. They want to maintain that power no matter what. And if it takes getting rid of democracy, they would do it. So don't be fooled that they love democracy. They don't. They only use the democracy to maintain their power. And once they have it 100%, look to democracy being completely nullified.
Mm-hmm. What do you think the solution is to sort of like social media censorship, which you were alluding to just now? Do you think it will be as many people proposing to break these companies up, or would it be to nationalize them, or what do you think the best solution is to the sort of big tech oligarch censorship problem?
Well, I don't know what the solution there is. I think if you can break them up, I don't know how you could do that. One thing they could do is just leave other platforms alone instead of like Parler. They shut Parler down. Why would you do that? That right there seems to be some legal trade. I'm not sure what you call it, but they shouldn't have been able to do that. And they could just make rules and regulations that saying you can't take a place like Parler and shut it down. It gets into all kinds of private company aspects, and I know that people can, well, it's a private company, but if the government is involved in supporting Facebook and giving it exempt status in certain areas, then the government's responsible for making sure that it doesn't abuse that, I believe.
The penultimate question for this interview, which has been 3 years in the making, what would your ideal world be? That's the title of the show, and it's what I ask all my guests who come on. What would your ideal world be?
Free. I would like to see people understand what the Constitution is about and understand that all of their rights, everyone's rights. Free speech isn't there for people that we only agree with. It's there for people, especially that we don't agree with, so that we can get all sides and get all kinds of perspectives. And my for an ideal world, it's the most perfect situation that's ever been created as far as a government. It's not perfect, but it's the best around. And I wish that people would be more educated in what the Constitution means and why it came about and where it comes from.
Fair enough. And yeah, so thank you for coming on. And one of the last thing I'll definitely ask you is like, what if people wanted if people wanted to find your work, where can they find you? What's your website? What's your social media? All that jazz. How can they find you?
They can find me on Facebook, Twitter. My website is comicallyincorrect.com.
Mm-hmm. And the final thing I want to say, yeah, is just a thank you for coming on. 3 years in the making, but glad to come on. And in my country, happy Brexit Day, I suppose, as well. If you don't mind me saying, thank you for coming on, and have a good one.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and share this video, as well as subscribe to the Ed Interviews YouTube channel, and also the Ed Interviews BitChute channel, and also look at my stuff on Mixcloud as well. I'll have more of this content coming in, and also subscribe to my Patreon subscribe star as well for more guest requests, as well as free copies of my old books. Until then, see you next time, guys.